So today we're going to talk about a little bit about photo and photojournalism history. Um, the term photograph stems from the Greek words which means light writing. It's also been referred to as the pencil of nature. Photographs history really began with camera obscura. So what would happen is light rays would pass through the opening and would be projected onto the opposite wall. And then the artist would actually trace the image. So here it is. This is the world's first photograph. In 1826, Joseph, I can't pronounce his name, Niepce, took the photograph at his family's country home. He produced this photo by exposing a bitumen-coated plate in the camera obscura for several hours on his windowsill. I think it took about 8 hours to develop, based on memory. He attempted to trace the outlines projected in his camera obscura. His hand shook, and his results obviously weren't that clear. But this is the world's first photograph, which is pretty cool. And this particular individual, he actually patented the process for fixing images on a polished metal surface. So what he did was actually he made the development process much faster than 8 hours. So basically, I think his photograph took about 30 minutes, but his invention had a fatal flaw. People had difficulties actually making copies of the photographs. So this is actually the first photograph of a human. The photograph is of a temple in Paris made in 1838 and it was, if you can see the little arrow over there, that's actually a human being, and he's in the bottom left-hand corner, and I believe he's actually having his shoes shine. So that's the first photo of a human. It's not too bad of a pic. So George Eastman started the Kodak Camera Company. He worked very hard to develop a camera that everybody could afford to buy. He did this in 1900. It was the Kodak Brownie box roll film camera. It cost a total of $1. And now with this particular invention, everybody could take photographs. It wasn't just professional photographers. So photojournalism really began in 1860 with Civil War photography, and Matthew Brady is the father of photojournalism. Matthew Brady, he's pretty much known for his portraits of celebrities and the documentation of the American Civil War. This is an example of one of those portraits. He managed a group of photographers, and he's actually given credit for many photos that he actually didn't take during the war. He shot on glass plates and not film, and he had a wagon full of darkroom materials. And he was actually rumored to actually position the bodies for better composition. That was quite a common practice. So what's kind of tragic, what a lot of people don't know, is the father of photojournalism actually ended up blind, broke, and alone. During the war, Brady spent over $100,000 to create 10,000 plates. He actually expected the U.S. government to buy the photographs when the war ended, but when the government refused, he was actually forced to sell his New York studio, and he actually went into bankruptcy. And so, depressed by his financial situation, loss of eyesight, and devastated by his death and a death of his wife, he became actually very lonely in the end. He ended up dying in 1895. So, depth of emotion is really what this photograph is saying. And from 1935 to 1942, the U.S. government hired photographers under a special section of the Farm Security Administration to create public awareness of agricultural problems and poverty associated with the Great Depression. So this is the most recognizable photo from that particular time period. So it's called Migrant Mother. This is a mom and her 7 children. What they say, though, what was interesting is Lang actually told the children to look away in that photo because they were actually a distraction. And this particular photo actually inspired the Grapes of Wrath. So when America saw Lang's images, support for Roosevelt and the New Deal increased rapidly. So this is, if you're interested in photography, this is definitely somebody you should be aware of. Margaret Burke White. She was the only female allowed in the war zone in World War II by the Army. She really set the standard for photojournalism and expanded the possibilities for being a female photographer. She had a photo on the first cover of Life magazine, so definitely someone of interest. I am sure many of you are familiar with this particular photograph. I believe it was on August 14th, 1945, the news of Japan's surrender was announced, signaling the end of World War II. So there was all kinds of crazy celebrations that took place in New York during that particular time. Many servicemen and women were photographed on this day, and this was just obviously a photograph of a sailor kissing the nurse, and it just became this icon symbolizing love triumphing war. So that's kind of a very famous photograph. This Henri Cartier-Bresson is actually a French photographer, and he's actually considered the father of modern photojournalism. So he developed the style of street photography, and so this idea of taking photography from the studio to the streets. And there are quite a few books on street photography, and I think it would be really cool to do like a street photography blog, but it's quite a fascinating genre. He argued in photography, the smallest thing can be a great subject. He was known for waiting for hours for the perfect photograph. So definitely somebody I would consider studying if you're interested in photography. Robert Capra records stories of conflict from Spain in 1936 to Vietnam in 1954. So he said, if your pictures aren't good enough, you aren't close enough. Ironically, he was actually killed by a landmine. This image, I'm sure you're familiar with. Flags of our fathers raising the flag of Iwo Jima. In 1945, it got a Pulitzer. And so this is actually a picture of 5 Marines and 1 Navy medic. However, within a month after the photo shoot, 3 of the 6 were actually killed in combat. Ansel Adams. If you're interested in landscape photography, it's definitely someone you should study. There was a documentary about him. It was actually a pretty good documentary. I would actually suggest that you watch. He's known for his black and white landscape photographs of the American West, especially Yosemite National Park. So black and whites were kind of his thing. Gordon Parks. He grew up in poverty, and this life actually inspired him to make something of his life because of the racism he grew up with. So he's actually described as the most important black photographer in the history of photojournalism. This photograph, it's actually called The Burst of Joy. This photograph came to symbolize the end of the United States' involvement in the Vietnam War, and the prevailing sentiment that the military personnel and their families could begin the process of healing after the horrors of that particular war. So this is a very famous photograph. Even one that's much more famous, you'll see in the next slide, is the street execution of the Viet Cong prisoner by Eddie Adams. So what happened here was the chief of police executed the prisoner. And what happened was that people didn't really understand the backstory of this of the following photograph. So basically, that prisoner commanded a death squad that murdered at least 30 policemen and their families. And some of the murdered were actually the general who fired the shots, family as well as his close friends. So basically, this 1968 photograph of the officer shooting the handcuffed prisoner at point-blank range earned Eddie a Pulitzer in 1969. But also it went a long way towards souring Americans' attitude about the Vietnam War. And I'm sure you've seen this particular photograph. The general was ostracized by the community. And so basically, Eddie actually said that he later regretted this particular photo because it became this anti-war icon. So he wrote in Time magazine, I'll read what he wrote. The general killed the Viet Cong. I killed the general with my camera. Still photographs are the most powerful weapon in the world. People believe them, but photographs do lie, even without manipulation. There are only half-truths. What the photograph didn't say was, what would you do if you were the general at that time and that place on that hot day? And you caught the so-called bad guy after he blew away 1 or 3 American soldiers. So Porter, he was actually an aspiring photojournalist. And this is the Oklahoma City bombing, and he ran towards the blast. Porter arrived to the federal building in Oklahoma City. He said, it's like they shaved off the front of the building and they took an ice cream scoop and scooped right down the center. Porter took pictures, saw a blur, and turned to his left. He said, it's a policeman carrying something. I just snapped a frame just as a policeman's hands it to a fireman. The fireman turns, and what he saw was an infant, and then he took a shot. The explosion that day killed 168 people, including this 1-year-old child in Porter's picture. So, American immigration sent Elian Gonzalez to live with his paternal relatives in Miami. So his father wanted his son to come back, and Janet Reno ordered Elian to return to Cuba. They actually sent in a SWAT team to take him back because there were so many protesters standing in front of this house. So this is what he said about the photograph. Diaz said, "The event stays with you forever." He admits that even as the father of 4, he had never heard such a cry of such desperation as the cry that came from Elian when the federal agents arrived. He said, in that moment, it was a cry that he would never forget. So these are just some examples of key photographers and moments that they captured in photojournalism. I encourage you to look at previous Pulitzer photos to see the moments that were captured and the ones that have won some awards.